text, and there I bought something, and I can survive.
I'm just thinking about how this as a charitable sort of thing, because I mean Eric raises the point that because the value of it really is not in line with the cost of living in the United States, it kind of sets a limitation up, right, on its value for us. But it would have great value supplementing the incomes of the very, very poor in other places, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that tells you, you know, I'm thinking about it in terms of solving a problem that we have in the United States, right? Which is we're always, you know, the big question about people from the South and Central America coming here looking to survive when actually, you know, none of them really want to come here, right? I mean, they are driven by economics and the enormous potential it would have to solve a problem that we have, which is mass migration out of South and more Central America and Mexico, and solve their problem, which is essentially one of poverty and all of the violence associated with poverty. So on that vein, are you guys thinking about that specific geographic area when you're looking for countries that might, governments that might be interested in working with you?
Right. I mean, essentially, there's a few barriers that we need to climb over. Where we've translated our white paper into several different languages. For Central and South America, we'd have to actually have the platform up, the entire platform in Spanish, or in the case of Brazil, in Portuguese. Mm-hmm. But mostly with the migration from Central and Southern America, or South America, you'd have a Spanish translation. So that's one, you know, simple part at the beginning, so we still have to do that. But yes, I mean, that's a refugee crisis. People talk of the refugee crisis being over in Europe from the Middle East. This is a refugee crisis. They're not termed, under the current political climate, they're not termed as refugees. You know, they're filing asylum, which is essentially what a refugee would be. They're coming here, or they're coming for economic opportunity, which is not defined. Various governments define it differently. What is a refugee, what is not, but they're coming to survive. Regardless they're fleeing persecution or violence or fleeing famine or just wanting a better life, they're coming here to survive. And that's the thing, is I think sometimes in the political debates, both maybe the left and right may have something wrong. Like one, you know, in one sense, I think everyone should feel welcome in a country. No one should be you know, yelled at and told to go back where they're from. Everyone should be welcomed, but it's not always the best thing that everyone comes over here. In fact, many of them, like you said, many of the people coming here, they didn't necessarily want to come and uproot their lives and come to the United States. If we can help them, they can stay in their hometowns if they desire to do that. And many of them, they really wish they could stay back home. It's not like they want to come and take away jobs or something like that. They want to stay back with their families for most cases and try to develop their communities there. But this can provide another method for them to actually go forward and do something in their own hometowns before they have to make a dangerous journey, you know, usually through another country, through Mexico and up across the border. But yeah, we really do wish to make an impact in that part of the world. So first there and then back.
What's one quick number question? How many people do you have signed up so far?
So we have, as far as verified users receiving the currency, so verified, I mean, we verified their humanity right now through, typically we're using phone numbers to verify, and if for some reason, and that worked globally, if for some reason it doesn't work, we'll ask for an ID, but we're trying to improve upon those aspects and do other methods. But we have over 100,000, as Eric said, that are verified. We have more than that have signed up that we're trying to work through verification with them. We talked about various biometrics, voice, etc., things like that to verify. But I think it's close to, we had to take down, I think, I have to ask Eric for specifics, I believe there were 75,000 ones that were set up with multiple email addresses that look the same. So there is some fraudulent activity that we fixed. We have our CTO working on how to get rid of fraud on the system. But I believe we have, as far as people signed up, about 200,000, roughly speaking, something like that. But
So-
some have to be verified.
So stop me if this is too Shark Tanky or if it's something that's like more internal. But my curiosity is like the level of mana currency right now is it's definitely not enough to be anything helpful in the U.S., but it's not enough to be helpful anywhere really yet.
Right.
So the question is, with like the numbers you guys have crunched and your targets, where are you at and what are your difficulties? Like, do you see it as you need to raise a certain amount more in money to back it, and or you need to have a certain number of users? Like, is there some sort of tipping point you're shooting for? Like, what are your targets? Because 100,000 sounds like a lot, but
we're globally, it's.
But what is it? Like,
right.
yeah, so, like, just to give an idea of, like, how many people you think you need to have to make it sort of start growing?
Right, so there's 2 points there. You mentioned like the people backing it money-wise, perhaps in fiat currencies, people backing it or with other cryptos backing our project. And then on the other side, you have number of users. So on the financial side, the beautiful thing about this organization is that we don't need to be one-to-one backed. It's not like someone has to give $1,000 for a recipient to receive $1,000 worth of mana. It's perhaps more on an order of magnitude of 10 times the amount of a donation can translate into this much of the mana currency's equivalency in a local currency. And yes, the amount that we have now, even in the developing world, is not going to make a huge amount of impact. It actually can make some. They have to sell it on exchanges because they can't necessarily use it unless someone in their community accepts it in exchange for goods. And so perhaps they can bank it up and sell it when they accumulate a very large amount they could sell in exchange. But ideally, we don't want that because we want to build the ecosystem. But we're telling people if you need to do that, I mean, the root of this is to help people survive. So right now, if you need to sell it on an exchange or on self-exchange, you can sell it there. But yes, we want to improve that the valuation so that it does make an impact both abroad and perhaps even making an impact here. But to do that, it's all in users. I think that's the big key, is not necessarily, we of course want the financial, the backing, we want people to donate to this project and people to invest. We have both, it's a non-profit that is wholly owning a for-profit organization. So we have these dual structures so that we can pull in donations. This is a 501c3 and have investors. We talk to angel investors and VCs to get both sides of this ecosystem just to see how we can pump enough cash to keep this flowing. But users is really key. We need to get more people to use this. We want to get a whole city on board, a whole country.
So like, what factor of growth do you need for it to be like robust?
We would like to, I mean, that's one of the discussions we just had, is if we got even a small nation state to come on board, that part of my work, if we did that, there's some consensus on the team that would really drive people's attention toward the organization and get people to sign up, and that would, so some of it is perhaps related to the promotions effect of that. As far as pure numbers, perhaps Eric's, he's the economist, I believe that's what his former degree was in, and so he may have a pure number in mind, but that's one thing, at least in my role, they've discussed with me, is like, if we could get this entire country, even a small nation state, some of the Pacific countries, or some of the countries that we're talking about, the Caribbean countries. Even one of those, some of them have a smaller population than my hometown in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But it just, you say, oh, a whole country is using this, it really creates this kind of impact. Even though it may be a few people, it just creates this kind of mindset of, wow, this is something that's going to continue snowballing forward. But exact number-wise, I probably couldn't say exactly, 1 million people, 2 million people. Eric would be best for that if you chat with him as far as if he's figured any numbers we need to, really hit our accelerated growth curve or anything like that. But that's at least my role, is to get a small, tiny country on board. I hope we can do that from my perspective, at least.
That would be very cool.
It would be, I hope.
From an aid perspective, you're talking about getting a country on board, like if you're approaching other countries, say Western countries, to maybe fund it to maybe introduce into a developing country, for example. Like what is the sell? I mean, what is the benefit of using a cryptocurrency like mana rather than just providing fiat currency directly, if they wanted to do a UBI project?
So you're talking about if it's an aid organization that wishes to donate into and start a
yes,
UBI.
or like a country's foreign aid program, like USAID or
Right.
Or a European aid agency is probably more likely.
Right, and so that's a good point, because the other perspective we were working on, in some sense, are coming from as like a sovereign state trying to fund their own UBI, but they can't afford it, and thus we jump in and say, we can give this to all your citizens, connect it up to, so that your government could attach it to everyone's, let's say they have a national ID, and et cetera, and just have that seamlessly set up so citizens can come in and receive this. But from your perspective, you have these Western governments or international aid organizations, perhaps they do have the cash to provide in that sense, and that maybe they would want to set up some sort of universal basic income program. And there have been a variety of trials around the world, and I've noticed some that are, very targeted on a certain community. I'm not aware, I don't have the names off the top of my head, but there's been trials, there's trials in Kenya and so on, of giving some sort of aid to a certain community in the form of some UBI-esque type of program. But I think what we enable is immense scalability, because it's a little bit difficult for an aid organization to pitch an idea where we're just going to give out this amount of money to an entire country, and if this doesn't work, wow, our budget has been shot on this particular project. But of course, if an organization has the money to give, like, yes, go ahead, give it. We don't want to compete with the US dollar or any other financial instrument that an NGO might have. Please do. I would tell any NGO, do give it out. Do provide UBI. But we think it's limited, and we don't see a lot of people going to try that right now. I don't see big NGOs saying we're going to give even a small country, even like Dominica was hit last year by a giant hurricane. It wiped out the infrastructure of the island. So I knew I had a friend that was studying, there's some offshore medical school programs that are based in the Caribbean. Dominica is one of them. Devastated the island. Just absolutely devastated them. I mean, of course there's aid going there, but I haven't heard of talks of UBI. We're reaching out to them. But yeah, sorry, I'm getting off kind of long-winded here. But yes. We'd love them to get involved.
But I guess my question is more so like, if they decided, like I'm from Ireland, and I know like Irish Aid has like operations in many countries, across the world, and for the size of the country, you meet the UN Development Programme targets and all of that, and there's a lot of administration that goes into the programs. If they decided on a policy level, actually, we want to get rid of all of those programs. Because the money we waste in administration, you have to go through the missions, all the rest of it. And if they say, okay, we want to actually just focus, we really believe in UBI. If we manage to convince them of that, and want to introduce UBI to the country, why should they go for mana rather than a fiat, like the local fiat currency? You know what I mean?
Right.
What are the pluses?
Right, so let's say they already have this cash. Yes, and they've decided they're going to do it, and they have the ability to give it to a whole country. And so why should they go forward with mana?
Yes.
Well, so there's a couple of reasons for that, too. The other thing is, it's really interesting. You're from Ireland. I was just walking through the Irish famine kind of memorial here in New York, because I'm part Irish, and I walked through a very moving memorial talking about how all these tiny towns, some industrialists just gave $100, and then a small town in Michigan that I'm very well aware of, I go there quite often, they gave $200, and they're not rich, but this industrialist gave just half that amount compared to this small town. And I was walking around, and it was talking about famines around the world, that took place after that, and describing how the world reacted. And people and programs, unfortunately, I think can be somewhat short-sighted too. And they have the wonderful program, government, Canada's running that, and that's Ontario government, I should say, and that's ended for whatever reason through various policy changes. NGOs can also experience changes in leadership, and so though I love the work that a lot of these amazing NGOs are doing, you have a change in leadership, a program could end. Whereas with mana, it's not subject to political changes. This is the core belief of the organization, to give this out, and no matter who is running it, when we've all grown old and passed on, that's still the core. That's the core principle guiding us. We're not going to suddenly wake up and say, oh, we're just going to give money to something else. And so longevity, I think, is one thing. But beyond that, just the flexibility of mana versus actual fiat money. I mean, as the world grows more mobile, I mean, there's this controversy. People saw like refugees fleeing from Syria with smartphones and said, "Oh, are these really refugees? They have smartphones in their hands." Well, no, the price of smartphones has plummeted. I mean, because you have a lot of phones that are from China. I've been to Shenzhen, China, where they actually produce a lot of these very cheap smartphones. And I've been there, and you're right. And so it's not like you have to be rich to have a smartphone. You might not have the iPhone there, or maybe they have a later generation. But so you have this digital technology that a lot of the world, even the developing world, and people that are in poverty are starting to have. And there's, of course, positives and negatives to usage of phones. Perhaps in the West you have some negative uses of being, as Dan and I have talked about, some negative uses of being glued to a phone, but it's also a transformative. Any technology can have good and bad aspects, and this is something, the wonderful aspects of this mobile technology is enabling someone who's way far away from some distribution point. Let's say if they have cold, hard cash. They're way out in the countryside, but they have a small mobile, and there's a signal. Perhaps, you have even a small signal. You don't need to have a smartphone even. People that are having dumb phones can perhaps use something like this. If we start to develop these apps that can be on those type of devices, they can use this. They don't have to walk to the capital or the largest city to get some sort of cash payout from an NGO. And again, I've not worked in those organizations. You might have a better experience, and then, well, actually that's more efficient than you think or something. But that's at least an outsider's perspective on how we can be more effective.
No, and I definitely, I've been to Uganda, and I know, you're talking about like people fleeing Syria with smartphones. Like, I remember one of the most striking things I saw was, people getting out of a wattle and daub hut which they lived in permanently, and like whipping out like a smartphone, which was like fancier than I think I had at the time, or whatever. But like that's because that's their lifeline, like that's their priority. You know what I mean? And like people go, oh, I think we sort of see it as a luxury.
Right.
Like,
that might be the only thing they have.
Exactly. No, literally, that is the only thing. Like I remember people that I met were like, it was their smartphone and it was like their Sunday best clothes that they wore to church.
Right.
And they were the two things.
That's it.
Like, they were
that's their physical possessions in the world. Right.
Yeah.
So, I want to just make sure that we have time for our other video.
Yes. Yeah.
So, does anybody have like one more or two more questions, or are there questions on the feed?
Can I just add one thing to what he said?
Of course, yeah.
I think you raised a really good point, though. But I would reframe it a little. I think what makes your pitch so difficult is that it's not so immediately apparent. It's a long-term system change, which is sort of like UBI versus immediate just send them dollars or John Deere tractors or whatever. I've been fundraising from a lot of foundations, and they have their current solutions mindset, and it tends to be more of the band-aids for the wound type of solution rather than the penicillin for the disease sort of solution. And it's really hard to find people who are thinking long-term system change because it's a lot harder to measure, takes a lot more vision and trust and faith. So, like what you're presenting and what UBI, like I talk about UBI in terms of foreign aid a lot, where I say, if some country like Haiti had their own UBI system in place that effectively distributed the wealth fund in it to all of its people, even if it wasn't sufficiently funded, it would be a great place for us to give charitably if it existed. Right? We gave $13 billion after the Haiti earthquake, and we found out like $12 billion of it got thrown away, and the Clinton Foundation, whatever. If we knew it was all going straight into the pockets of the Haitians, not only would they use it better, but we'd probably give more.
Right. There's some mistrust.
And if we had a UBI, we'd probably give more too, because we'd be safer. Like, it's a long-term thing, though. It's not something that you're going to have happen next year. And foundations measure themselves yearly.
Right, and that's you need the Band-Aid and you need the penicillin. I mean, we don't want to give up on otherwise the person dies while they're waiting for this long-term solution. So you have to have people working on the long-term and the short-term to really keep society moving. So we're glad to have that. And hopefully it's not as long as some might think. Hopefully we're able to really scale this up. But still, it is longer term than I give someone $1 now, you can spend it immediately. Yeah, it takes time and dedication.
So if there's no other questions,
I will just even though I really want to show the video too, that you look at UK is they recognize that a cash program is too expensive or it has different benefits than a time bank based program. And so a lot of their social services are tied into time banking. And I don't think they use it as a UBI, but they do use it as a way to measure. They do use it in their social services portfolio.
They use what's in time banking?
Time banking, yeah.
In the
Yeah.
UK.
In the UK, in their social services portfolio, they actively encourage it in like housing projects, whatever they call it there.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the awesome
Yeah.
questions and everything.
Any
Well,
more questions for Ken before we move on?
sign up at manandbase.com.
We'll have more
Check it out.
Seriously, sign up and give it all away.
All right, so now we have, why don't we go straight to Andrew's
Yeah.
video? So, I don't think Andrew really needs, do I need to like stand here? I don't know if Andrew needs introduction. I know that a lot of people here know who Andrew Yang is at this point. However, for those who might not know who he is, he made this video especially for us. I asked him to make it last week, and so we have that there. And if you have questions about his campaign, I would encourage. I mean, I can answer some questions. I've done some volunteer work for him, so I can answer some questions. But of course, if you have deeper questions, you can probably just contact his campaign directly. But let's look at what he had to say. What he has to
Hello,
say
New
to
York
us.
City
Okay.
basic income community. Thank you for coming together to celebrate Basic Income Week. The people that I like the most are the people that adopted universal basic income early on. So thank you for leading this charge and helping build this movement from the ground up. I'm Andrew Yang. I'm running for president as a Democrat in 2020 on a platform of universal basic income as a necessity because our economy is evolving and we need to evolve with it. We need to build a more human-centered economy from our people up, our families up, and our communities up. And you all are going to help make that happen. So basic income, I came to it because of my work in the technology sector. But now that I've embraced it, I realized what it's going to do for families, people, Americans around the country in terms of their mental health, physical health, nutrition, graduation rates, allow you to do the kind of work that you actually want to do. We're going to redefine work and value to make it more appropriate for the 21st century. The campaign is going great. This week I'll be in New Hampshire, which is why I can't be with you today. Next week I'll be in Iowa. And the way the democratic process works, so the DNC just made it so that superdelegates can't vote in the nomination process. So who becomes president is solely going to be on the shoulders of the Democratic voters of Iowa and New Hampshire. And I'll tell you, the people in Iowa and New Hampshire see the same things that you see, that our economy is not working for people anymore, and they want big change. I've been to each of these states multiple times now, and we have a real chance to change the conversation in the days to come. And with your help, we can make that a reality. Thank you for coming together. Have a great time today. And if you want to help out with the campaign to build up towards 2020, just go to yang2020.com and join us there. Have a great time today. Let's make it happen. Let's make it real. Thank you all.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything?
Do I want to add anything? Only, I think if, Ada, right? You said you were not familiar with his campaign, so if you have any questions that you want to ask, we can try to answer them, because a lot of us are already familiar.
Oh, not really.
Not really? Okay.
I would say go to the website
Yeah.
and read through his stuff and watch the videos on there because they're much more produced and everything. And if you like it, read his book because it's actually maybe the best basic income book I've read. He's actually sharp as a fucking tack. And he's got a knack for telling the human story, you know. So especially for those of you in America, I don't know In Canada too, it's relevant, but he's got a good beat in the American situation in the labor market, and it'd be a good thing to know as someone who's coming out of school soon what you're walking into. So it's actually a book I recommend to college kids.
Okay.
That's good, yeah.
Awesome.
And he's starting to break through into traditional media as well. I saw he had an article on CNBC, so he's been covered there. It's not only really small outlets at various places in Iowa now, so he's starting to get a little bit of attention. You know,
He's in quite a bit actually.
Right.
He's been in the Times. He's been
Yeah.
all over. He's
Yeah, he's getting
He's
good
coming up.
coverage. Do you have any questions from the peanut gallery?
No.
Virtual peanut
The only thing I'll let people know is I think 2 people that were watching this thought it was a teaching video, maybe on chemistry, because we're in a classroom setting. So just so everyone out there knows, we are talking about a basic income,
Oh, okay.
even though we are in John Jay College,
All right,
and
yeah.
we are not talking about chemistry. I
we're
hope that
not.
became apparent throughout watching this video.
No, we're definitely not talking about chemistry.
unless you have the human chemistry between the
Right. Okay, yeah. So I don't have anything further with Andrew. I do know that he's traveling and he's got a real focus on Iowa and New Hampshire right now, which I'm sure is strategic based on what he said.
Yeah.
And you know, my perspective of it is that besides, I mean, if there were anyone that was qualified to kind of to be candidate for president, it's definitely Andrew Yang. But it's kind of an extra bonus that he has realized that a capitalist such as himself, has realized that a universal basic income is a really desirable solution to a lot of our problems. Instead of just what you usually get, which is people talking about how there's some kind of magic formula to creating new jobs, and all we have to do is find the person that can do it. So so I'm really compelled by his campaign and want to help out however I can. However, I mean, if there were other candidates that were getting behind a universal basic income, most certainly they deserve our attention too. To my mind, I don't think anyone is. I think he's the only one.
It's starting, like on lower levels, there's some.
Oh yeah, like?
I think there's a couple in, 1 or 2 in Hawaii.
Oh.
There's a couple who at least ran, but there's a couple who are favorable in California.
Mm-hmm.
There are people around the country who are starting to talk, but I think that the truth of the matter is politicians are always the last to come on board, and that's
Right.
kind of what makes Andrew really special, is he's boldly making that the central part of his campaign.
Right.
So even the burners and Alexandria Ocasio and all that, knowing people on the inside, many of them are very for it, but they don't want to risk their progress on Medicare for all and other things
Mm-hmm.
by putting something in front of people that could get them laughed at, right?
Right.
Because it's our job as activists to create a fertile ground for them to push it. Really, change happens to the people. It's not the leaders, and the
Right.
leaders are the ones who best get up and speak to what people want.
Right.
So it's still on us.
Hey, Ian Schlagman, who's running for governor
All
in
right.
Maryland,
Woo!
is a prominent basic income supporter, very public about it.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'll just finish off the topic so we can start our discussion, maybe, even though it's almost 9 o'clock. So I did want to just talk for a second about a couple different issues. I want to touch on the North American Basic Income Conference. I'll talk about BN. I don't think I have time for all this stuff, I'll be honest with
No,
you.
probably not. Why don't you jettison
Yeah.
one of them?
Well, let's talk about, let me just tell you this, because I do think that I am one of the co-founders of Basic Income Action along with Diane, and I do like to put that nonprofit hat on and focus on a cooperative method of making sure that we're all bringing what we have to the table when we're talking about a basic income and pushing it forward as one big agenda. Democrat, Republican, Green, Libertarian, whatever. But in this case, I do want to make sure that my viewpoints are represented here today, because myself, I'm a socialist. I work a lot with the Democratic Socialists of America. I was on their National Electoral Committee. And I am also running with my running mate, who's right there in that chair, Reverend Annie Chambers, who is a former Black Panther. She likes to say, no such thing as a former Black Panther. She's still a Black Panther in the struggle, still fighting Donald Trump on the Housing Authority board that she's on in Baltimore City. And that's us in front of the Poor People's Campaign. My head's cut off because you got to scroll down to get the rest of the picture. But I do want to bring a particular perspective to the table, because I think that a lot of the momentum and topics we hear about basic income revolve around a discussion about it from a venture capitalist perspective or a capitalist perspective. And I am a socialist. We're a strong socialist ticket running for governor of Maryland, and we bring a totally different view. We see how bad poverty is in this country. It's bad all over the world, don't get me wrong, but it's still terrible in the US. And what we're seeing is, and this is my personal opinion, that we've got two parties, the duopoly, that really like capitalism. They're addicted to capitalism. They're suggesting capitalist policies to drive us forward. Like in my home state of Maryland, they're trying to pitch each other, outdo each other for who can bid the lowest for Amazon's headquarters. Amazon's headquarters is not going to fix poverty in our area, and we're giving thousands of dollars in tax breaks to Jeff Bezos, who's the richest man in the country. Doesn't make a ton of sense. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and my own Mayor Pugh in Baltimore City agree. The public housing, time to shut it down, because it's too dangerous, and there's drugs, and there's criminals, and let's close it. And so Reverend Chambers and myself fighting to keep it open. So one of the things we want to do is want to make sure that not just folks like us get to hear about basic income, but that folks also in public housing, on public assistance, who are talking to social workers every day, know that they could actually demand a basic income, know what it is, that it's a real policy. We didn't just make this up because we're socialists. It's something that all different kinds of people are fighting for. And in fact, Martin Luther King fought for it way back in the 60s. So it's relevant today. And actually, Reverend Chambers, who was on the head of the steering committee of the Poor People's Campaign, went to Reverend Barber and said, we got to make sure this is front and center. And they've been talking about a basic income in their Poor People's Campaign. So this is a very close issue to my heart. I think that it's one of those demands that when you first hear it, it sounds so big, you go, could that really be possible? Could the government really do that? And then when you look through the decades of work done on this subject, you realize that, yeah, it's past time. It's past time for us to actually get this done. One of the things I do want to speak to is I was at the North American Basic Income Conference. I don't tell other areas how to do basic income, because there was a lot of discussion about Mobcam, which was the previous experiment, and I was shocked to learn that was a means tested basic income. It was every month. If you wanted to apply for a Mobcam, you'd have to write down how much money you're making, and the government gives you a supplement. Not exactly the same thing as a universal basic income, which is what we're calling for. And so there is a little bit of tension in the basic income community, but I really want to make sure that we just have everyone at the table, because it's very important to understand that there's a whole other world of basic income supporters out there that are not looking at this from the automation lens or the refugee lens, we're looking at this from the feminist lens as well. Reverend Chambers and myself, we're now both part of National Welfare Rights, which is a kick-ass organization of welfare supporters around the country that have redone that organization to make it more relevant again. What we're trying to make sure people understand is that mothers, caregivers, people that are just taking care of family members, they're not paid. It's not paid income. It's not paid work. Something I learned about when I started working with Edgar Kahn at the Time Bank. This is a big deal, and people don't understand that when you don't pay someone for that work, you don't get Social Security on it. You're not able to cash out on it. You're not able to understand how it makes sense. And so then politicians talk about workfare. And now I just heard today from Diane that they're talking about in New York City. Does this actually happen? They're actually making them, if you live in public housing, you have to work 20 hours a month?
You have to agree to 20 hours of volunteer work a month.
It's crazy. I mean, just walk through our public housing project. I really think that more
people running for office need to do this, because and I'm sure I don't have to preach to the choir here. It's not folks that are living up the Ritz, you know. I mean, you're there, you know. Public housing is there, thank God, for the few that can get it to it, because it's so backlisted. And plus, there's a lot of people in it that are disabled. And as the disability rate goes up, we hear from conservatives, oh, you know, people are just abusing the disability system. No, there are that many people that are disabled in our country or unable to work for one reason or another. And so this is another reason that I really want to make sure this particular angle gets put out there, the socialist angle, because we're not calling for a jobs guarantee. We think a jobs guarantee is a great idea. We think it's the next step after a basic income. Because the first thing we know is that if you've ever met someone who's lived a life of poverty, they know how to spend that dollar better than probably anyone in this room. Let's just be frank. There's no way around that. There's no way around that. So the first thing we have to do is make sure they get the money into their pockets and they're able to afford their basic living expenses. That's the first thing. And then we can talk about a jobs guarantee, because not everyone's going to be able to get out there and grab a job. I don't want my grandmother, you know, rest in peace, actually, picking up a broom and sweeping the last couple of days of her life to make sure she gets she has to make sure she gets a job guarantee. That's just not fair. You know, these are a couple of the key issues that we're talking about in my race. We really want to bring socialism to the front and center in my race down in Maryland. I know things are a little different here in New York. We've got a couple of really cool, kick-ass politicians that just wanted socialist. Some that lost, but a lot that won. That's pretty cool. In Maryland, we've got a lot of very weird dynamic. We've got a lot of old, stale progressives, old, stale centrist Democrats and Republicans that just kind of keep things afloat. We don't really move forward. And Maryland's one of the richest states in the union. So if any place could afford a Maryland basic income, we know it's Maryland. And we're thinking $1,000 a month, starting in where I come from, Baltimore City. Because if anyone's heard any news about Baltimore City, they know it's poverty-ridden and it's crime-ridden. And we think the right way to do it is not to put more cops on the street, but to make sure everyone has enough money to live. Simple as that. It's an economic decision when you step into a life of crime. You either feed your family or you don't. Feed your community or you don't. So it's time that we change that dynamic and make sure people have the money they need to live, full stop. That's why we don't have to worry about, as socialists, I could just say, capitalism doesn't support this model, but this is the model we're enforcing. I love the capitalists that are thinking about it. I think that's great, and I support them, but we're thinking about it a little differently. And we want to reform the way we do economics from the ground up, make it more human rights based. And then I will say briefly, that is one of the topics that came up at Basic Income. Finland. What was that? What's the name of the town? Temperi? I don't know. Tampere?
Finland.
Yeah. It's trying to couch this in a human rights framework. Not to sound too one world government, but I do think that I think you were saying it from Mana, right? Or your founder was. We don't have. The UN's always quick to actually point out what would or wouldn't be a human right on that worldwide level. And then it's individual governments from a state standpoint, from a country standpoint, that just don't implement it or just fell short.
And that's where he says we don't have a global government.
Yeah.
We have this recommendation, and it's up to these states that may or may not want to.
Yes.
Basically, basic income is written into the UN Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It's so true. And I do want to have a discussion on this, and I know it's after 9. So I'll just finish by saying, that a human rights way of looking at economics is what I think socialism is all about, and that's why I'm proud to be running with the Green Party and pushing that particular angle so that we could focus on economic as a human right, not as a constant growth system that doesn't really make any sense. And that's it. Thanks a lot. And I will say thanks to everyone watching the live stream. I really appreciate it. I think we're probably going to have a little bit of discussion and then close up, right, Diane?
Yeah. I have a very brief thing that I want to read to you before we have our discussion, because I'm hoping that it will sort of add an element to the discussion.
I just want to mention, I'm sorry, I actually have a whole, Brian's going to kill me if I don't mention this, because we've written quite a bit about basic income.
Who's going to kill you?
Brian.
Oh, okay. We don't want any bloodshed here. So.
We have a whole list of basic income policies and proposals up here.
Can you,
if anyone...
Can you tell people clearly the name of your website?
It's just schlackman.com.
Oh, great.
And we've got cards and stickers up here.
Okay.
And if anyone is watching from the basic income community, not in New York City, please check it out. We'd love your feedback on this. because, you know, I think this is a dialogue that has to happen. We've got to expand and grow the dialogue. I have a lot of experience working with alternative currencies, cryptocurrencies, you know, and I think that this is a large community that has to grow. Otherwise, we're going to flounder economically, and it's not going to be good. So that's it.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Go ahead,
all
Diane.
right. So before we kind of break into a more informal discussion, I wanted to share something. So,
My card's up here, sorry.
yeah, awesome.
Don't get in touch.
Okay. So as some of you may know and some may not know, I'm a social worker by profession, and I've been one for 14 years. And in around 2012 to 2013, I was unemployed. And there was a huge degree of lag time between my receiving unemployment insurance and my actual period of unemployment. And I experienced a lot of economic hardship at that time. I was broke all the time. It was, and I really feel like that, although I was a basic income supporter way before that, I feel like that really contributed to my vision of why a basic income is so important. And so I'm writing a book about that experience, and I want to share a section of it so that you guys, you know, for whatever it's worth, to add to the discussion, because I feel like the experience that I had in 2012, just for a little context, I already had 2 college degrees in 2012, and I worked in 2012 for $7.25 an hour while I was unemployed, having 2 graduate degrees, because I wasn't able to find another social work position expediently. You know, I could go into all of the troubles that it caused me, but there's really no point in doing that, because I'm sure that everyone that's listening has, you know, had their own economic struggles, and they can understand where I'm coming from. So in 2012, I ended up taking a job out of desperation when I didn't get unemployment insurance, and it was at a survey taking company called Universal Survey, and I worked for $7.25 an hour under deplorable conditions, and I'm writing about it. So I hope that this will add to our brief discussion about UBI. So this is a section that I wrote. It's only about 1 page, about one of the phone calls that I had to make at Universal Survey. I called people all night, all over the country, and whatever survey appeared on my computer, I would read it to them, and I would get credit for their answers. But of course, as you know, in a survey, you have to get specific answers to your survey. And my impression from calling people all over the United States was that there was a lot of hardship everywhere. Not, you know, typically we think of the only people that are having hardship as the people that we see that are visibly destitute, but that really isn't the case. So one night I made a call, and it went something like this. One evening, a man answered the phone. At Universal Survey, you were supposed to be friendly and professional to the people you cold called for your surveys, but you were not supposed to go off script or answer any personal questions. Just like in real life, sticking to a script was often quite difficult. In my calls, I rang up people who didn't want to talk at all, but I also rang up people who were waiting to be listened to. And a stranger calling from no defined place may be better than the aftermath of judgment and worry that comes from talking to people in one's own house. I told the man about our survey, and he agreed to answer my questions. From the first question, I was unable to get the simple responses that count. Rajit had a problem, and every question I tried to ask was linked to it. I started this survey by asking for his response to the declaration, "Our country is headed in the right direction." This is 2012. The 4 options were strongly in agreement, somewhat in agreement, somewhat in disagreement, strongly in disagreement, or no response. He answered, "The people running this country are ignoring how hard it is to pay the bills." "So which answer do you choose?" I asked, trying to get the answer that counted for the survey. He said that his income was his Social Security check. "But it isn't enough to live on," he yelled at me. Then he lowered his voice back down. "Right now, I'm behind on all my bills." This included his house payment. He took the time to say that his house isn't a big house or an expensive house. He said he was not going on any trips, not even to see family who needed him. I don't hear men sounding scared often, but he sounded scared. I looked up over the top of the desk to see what my manager was doing. At that moment, she was not on her pedestal monitoring random calls. The sing-song of his accent covered the desperate content of what he was saying, and he might have been talking about something more pleasant. I gave up trying to ask my questions and I let him talk. Well, about 35 minutes later, way longer than the survey would have taken, I tried to wind down the call. The last thing I said was, "Don't worry, things will get better. Thank you for talking to me." The last thing he said was, "Do you have to go?" So that's just to contribute a little bit to the conversation. Thank you. So I wanted to read that to you because I think it speaks to, when you make these calls, I made so many calls while I was in that situation where people were just at the end of their ropes. And it was like, you're just there and you don't know what to say to comfort them and you don't know what to do. And indeed, the rules of being a survey taker, it's a very low income position, but the rules of being a survey taker are basically that you're not supposed to engage them on a personal level. And, you're just supposed to try to get answers that count for what the company, what the company's needs are. And so I came across so many people that were like this man. I came across people who were in nursing homes, who had told me they had spent the whole day alone. I ran into people, I called up people who, had just lost a house or had just lost a job. Like it was really incredibly overwhelming. And at a certain point, I started taking notes about the phone calls because my managers weren't paying attention really that much anyway. And I figured I should get something out of it because I was earning so little money, But it was really scary to hear so many people in need. But at the same time, if we can tap into those people as potential UBI supporters, I think that there's a lot more people. I think there's a majority block out there of people who would understand a universal basic income if we explained it, or if we could just get to them,
This was kind of the gist of where you're heading there, of the speech I gave in Hamilton, which is that, automation and stuff has gotten us a lot of attention, raised us a lot. But humanism is where it really is moving forward. And if anything's ever going to be passed in something like UBI, it has to be a people's movement. It has to be grassroots. And what I've learned from driving around the country for 2 years and just interviewing people everywhere, from reservations to big cities to whatever, is that there's a big demand for change. There's a big appetite for an idea like this if explained right. And And that's the way we should really be thinking, is not like, how many thought leaders can we get to support it, how many tech CEOs?
Yeah.
It's, how can we get the message in a pure and honest way to as many people as possible? Because they'll get it, and they'll be ready for it.
I just want to say I am going to end the live stream for those of you that are watching, but I think that, you know, those of us here, especially those in New York City, Diane and the New York City folks put this on a shoestring, and if there's any chance you could help us on a weekly or a monthly basis, that would be awesome. So I'm just going to put that out there. And thanks to everyone for watching, especially to Janet and Dan, who made some final comments there, and really enjoyed your poem, your story too.
Oh,
They put some
thank
hearts
you.
up there. Yeah.
Oh, let's stay in touch.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so basicincomeaction.org, and all the contact info is on the bottom if you want to join up and you're not local. And then the New York folks, I think you guys should talk a little later.
Okay.
All right, thanks everyone.
All right.
All right.